All right. Well, here we are. Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Welcome to day 3 of the TCC MakerCon. I'm Andrew Stroshine. I'll be monitoring the Q&A window and sharing your questions and comments with our speaker. Today's speaker is Barb Mueller. She is the co-founder of Gizmo and was partner and CEO for an R&D company, MSN Design. She's here today to talk with us about badging, a conversation about badging in all of its forms and for all ages. We're looking forward to this session and finding out about the issue of badging, which applies a lot better to what we think of as makers, where we're learning chunks of skills or individual skills that may not fit into a full 4-year degree type program. Barb, let's go ahead.
Hi. Okay.
Hi.
Well, this is really bizarre because I can't see you and you can't see me, which might be okay.
Tell everyone, because of our technical difficulties, just to explain, we're having Barb call in on another line, but we're running the slides. So we'll be working with her going back and forth through the slides. So just keep that in mind. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. In 2014, my husband, Marty Mueller, and myself partnered with the University of Idaho and opened a community makerspace, Gizmo CDA. Its mission statement is very easy. It's empowering through doing, and that's what we've been doing for the last 6 years. So if you slide, in reality, Gizmo is kind of a passion project. Only the guy from U of I finished college. My husband and I both dropped out. I had started college thinking that I would figure out what influenced groups of people to think like they did, kind of the herd mentality. I could never understand that. And my husband thought he would like to be an engineer. And what he really wanted to do was to work in an academic makerspace where he could be building things all day long. That's really what he wanted to do. And neither of us found pathways in the traditional learning to be able to match what we wanted to do, and we became dropouts. Even so, we met 10 years later, and we both built an impressive resume in our 20s because we kept trying new things and thinking outside of the box, challenging what was going on around us. And I will admit, I'm not sure whether we were taking risks or just foolish, but we certainly kept pushing the envelope and going forward. And together, we developed a very successful research and development company, hiring people who were a lot like us. They had very little formal training in the fields that we were exploring. The fields were completely changing as we were in the middle of them. And we grew the talents of the people who worked with us through kind of these bite-sized trainings. When we needed to know something, we found out, where we would find that information. We sleuthed it out, and we gathered together to learn it together. We talked a lot about working in a technical field because all the people sitting around our table had tried to work for large corporations, and they would never hire us because we didn't have a bachelor's or master's in engineering. They didn't have a way to see past, that diploma and just look at the experiences that each of us had had. And in retrospect, I think that's why we are believers in badging, because there is a way to be able to convey what you know in a different format. So if you'll slide again, change the slide, you should be seeing 2 pictures of, they have scouts and what merit badges look like. And after all, all through these years, since 1907, Scouts have been giving out merit badges, encouraging people to explore areas of interest that would teach them some skill set that they were after. And if my husband and I had gotten merit badges for all that we had learned on our own, we would probably be kind of walking around with this killer sash of the overachiever in the picture, who actually earned every single merit badge put out by the Boy Scouts. And instead, education in the beginning took a different track. They didn't do merit badges or small bits of learning. And if you'll change the slide, the Federal Department of Education was established in 1867, and it helped states establish a public school system that the states could work together and bring education to the people that live there. And by 1890, the Department of Education's responsibilities expanded, and they included higher ed and VOTEC and agriculture and some industry and even home economics. And the movement for compulsory public education in the United States actually began in the early 1920s. But bureaucracy, compounded by complex social disparities, meant we underutilized our greatest resource, our kids, our youth. Because people just don't all learn in the same way. Some learning from traditional teaching works, but some people need other kinds of stimulation or movement, or often, as we know, a hands-on education. So the reality is the current education system can't deal well with different learning styles, at least not as long as it targets test scores. The very nature of tests relies on memorization, repetition, and I hate this word, but it's true, regurgitation. I'm having trouble with my words today. So if you click this slide, tests infrequently harness the analytical mind. And if you do the slide again, they train students to know the answers. And click the slide again. However, and one more time, they don't train them on how to find the answers. We had a young student who was in advanced AP history, and he was on our robotics team. And he came in one day, and he said he had an awful lot of studying to do that night. He was going to leave early. I asked him what he was studying, and he said every week his history teacher gives him 24 pages of notes. And they have to memorize those notes because it's the dates and what happened, but there was very little discussion about what was happening culturally in that time that was influencing what they were learning. So here he is. All he's learning is what he needs for the test. And he's not learning about the heart of what history is about, nor is he learning really how to find those answers. So by the age of 11, many kids believe they don't like math or science, when really what they don't like is not having context for what they're learning. They are, in my opinion, this is my opinion, they are unintentionally being separated into two groups, those that think they can succeed and those that don't. In most schools, there are no way to find a pathway to explore the topics that vary from an 1890s teaching style. Slide. High school students look at college and over 35% of them choose not to go. It's the continuation of the Great Divide. In most cases, it's the limiting factor to be ready for the future of work. Work is changing. They need to have the education to be able to do it. It's no longer simply enough to be able to crank on a motor. They have to know now what the electronics of the motor is and know all of the things going forward as that will change. So they are left being stuck in a portion of time. And without education, they don't have the wherewithal really to be able to move forward. And the cost of college leaves many students strapped with debt, which is compounded by not having a clear path of study. So students come to college, they're not prepared to choose a major. You know, they do a 15-hour senior project. I'm sure lots of you do those with students, and it's too late and too little. So parents tell them to follow in their footsteps, or the students take an aptitude test, and they come up with a major. But they do it without personal experience, and they often choose, during the course of going to college, 3 different majors. And so each time they change the major, they have to go back and take whatever the prerequisites were for their major, and then a whole new set of classes. So not only does it take more time, but it adds dollars to an already expensive process of getting educated. So I'm really curious, you know, as you sit there, I'd like to know whether teaching, or if you are a teacher or you're running a makerspace, Was that your first choice, or how did you come to be influenced to do what you're doing now? And you don't have to worry about taking time to do that because I'm still on my soapbox, and there'll be a little time before I go to the process of badging. So feel free to do that now. And I know that I'm speaking like there are not other schools that are trying to incorporate other methods. It's just too few and too little. So if we would start badging at a very young age, it would give opportunities to students to explore ideas and develop skills that can be incorporated into every age level. It gives students the ability to use their experiences to decide what their future should look like. And then they can collaborate with mentors to be able to find the pathway for what they do formally in education and informally in learning things. It just helps to answer the question, and if you do the next slide, can I do this, and will I be passionate about it? When you go to school, you leave with a piece of paper that describes that you have the knowledge to be an engineer, an architect, a welder, a healthcare professional, but it does not say that I can communicate what I know, integrate it with what I've learned, or whether I can think critically and be a problem solver. Just think if the student graduated high school with a backpack full of badges that describe what they have been interested in and how that would change their getting their first job or getting into college with grades that might not be as high as other students. In the last 10 years, there's been this confluence of technology and need for education, and that change has been happening and leading us, I think, to more badging and e-portfolios, which I think you're going to hear in these sessions today. It can show the soft skills that are needed, so when you hire a person or even getting funded to do a startup company, you have a better picture of that person. The same degree means something different from institution to institution. A badge can say all of the skills it took to earn that badge and give the person who is looking at that badge deeper knowledge of the work done. Excuse me. Tom Cara, who is the chair of the Industrial Advisory Board at the University of Wales, because they're thinking about the same thing, said, while academic achievements can be evidenced by an academic transcript, there is no such evidence of the so-called soft skills, the personal attributes that enhance a graduate's work ethic, job performance, interaction with colleagues, and ultimately career prospects. So if you would do another slide. And my experience as a person trying to find a job echoed what Shane Spalding said. Resumes and certificates don't deeply portray a job seeker. And so when I was in my 20s and 30s, starting to go out looking for different work than what I was doing, I would always be asked, or even if I wouldn't be asked, I sometimes didn't even get the interview because they would see on my resume that I did not have the college certificate, college diploma, nor did I have graduate school. So I wonder what the biggest problem for an institution is to start doing a badging program. And if you have a feeling about that, I'd like you to answer in the chat. So let's start talking about badging. If you would click. Though badging has been around since the 1900s, the use of digital badges as credentials was under the radar until about 2011, when a white paper was written, an open badge system framework authored by Peer-to-Peer University and the Mozilla Foundation. The report asserts that badges, and I think you might have to click through these one at a time, set goals, moderate behaviors, motivate learning, represent achievement, and communicate success in context. So if you have those on the screen, I would say Mozilla Foundation developed an open technique called open badges to create a common system among multiple sites. They were thinking ahead about how it could become so confusing and not able to be trackable. And they set a goal to have a container which would be made to make a badge transferable between sites while maintaining the same meaning. So there is an organization, openbadge.org, and there are a bunch of volunteers, like a community of developers who provide the vision and continue to promote the adoption of open badges. And because these badges follow an open standard, recipients can combine badges from different sources and store them in what's called a backpack. It allows a person to create a collection of badges from many sites using pathways that have already been created or create their own. And then someone can look at that by a link that can be put on your resume, through LinkedIn, or just through conversation that would bring them to seeing what your badges look like. And so if you're starting your badging experience in your organization, Wiki has a badging resource page which is updated all the time. So if you do the slide, it'll give the link to that. And then Gizmo itself has just started using the free version of Badger, which is one of those that will be listed on the badging platform. So if you'll click again, a badge holds a clickable graphic that's not only an online record of its achievements, it shows the work required for the achievement. It tells you which organization issued it and when. It will even talk about the alignment to existing standards. So if you're doing something within a school or somewhere there are standards that have to be followed, it will be listed there and you can check whether or not the student has done that. It can indicate an expiration date. So if it's a badge that needs to be renewed after 2 years, it would indicate in that badge that that had to happen. But I think one of the strongest aspects is that you can create evidence by having a link to an e-portfolio. That portfolio contains written documents, drawings, videos, and even slide presentations. It offers another method for a student or a learner to be able to communicate their process. It shows iterations of ideas. And I think that you'll be able to hear more about that later on. The process for getting the badges on Badger is very straightforward. The process for defining what the badge is much more complicated. After going through the process, I would recommend that you have the website where someone can sign up to do the badge to be developed first, as it will just allow you to be able to answer the questions that open source badge website will ask. So if you'd start with the first slide, this badge is showing 3D modeling and machining, and it's the first level of it. And so this is our process. You have to name and create an image for the badge. The name is easy, so we wanted it to be called 3D Modeling and Machining 1. That's easy. But most sites say, but each site says you have to make an icon for that badge. And most sites have icons that you can pull together for the badge, but we over here at Gizmo have a sparkler brain and we also have an embroidery machine. So we actually made our own and made embroidered badges that we give out. You want to create both a verbal and a visual representation of what the pathway looks like, and you can see that at the bottom of that screen. So if you'll click again, so this is a detailed list of the steps it will take for completion. We have chosen to give a summary of the expectations of the project and how to get ready for the course. In our course, you have to choose a CAD system and create a Google site for your e-portfolio. Click again. Our choice in doing badges is to continue to have interactions with the person who's getting the badge. And we do that because we did a lot of informal badging before we did the formal online badge. We were doing badging within our own system. And what we were finding is that the more connection we had with people, the more they stayed motivated to do the completion. As this badge has a mentor attached to it, and the badge earner person is building a manufacturing skill set, there needed to be continual collaboration. So we talk about that. Once your website is built, your steps are to post at the site that will host your badge. If you'll click now, you'll see what that looks like for Badger. In your account, the really cool thing is that in your account, you may have more than one issuer. So your institution can host badges from many different departments, allowing collaboration with your colleagues on designing courses. So click to the next slide. You also can have a pathway to create multiple badges that can form a curriculum. So by doing this, the issuer can follow the process of the learner and award milestone badges along the way automatically. And I have watched students who are thwarted by being, I don't know, I say limited by a defined period of learning. So some learn faster, some learn slower. And what if a learner can learn at their own rate, getting help if they need it, or going through the badge quicker? Could we keep both the slow and fast learner more engaged? The thing that I find most interesting is the pathway can include badges from other issuers as well as from your own institution. So it allows for collaboration and use of other institutions' expertise to complete a skill set. So it might be that North Idaho College has a badge in computer science, but it so happens that at our facility, there is a robotic arm that came from Boeing that's owned by U of I. So now there is kind of a pathway that can be created. So if you're doing computer science, one of your pathways could be working on that robotic arm, even though they're maintained by two separate institutions. The flexibility in all of this is the badges earned are held in these backpacks, and the learner can hold them on the site that received the badge or transfer them to the other sites that are accessible to the learner. And so I'm curious if your institution is doing badges, and if you can see a way of them being able to do this link with either other institutions or workforce or a business out in the workforce. So if you would click the slide. You need to ask yourself, why is badging important, and is it right for your program? Because it takes time to make the badge and it takes time to manage them. That's what we have found here, because most of them require a mentor. In a makerspace, there are a lot of reasons, but for us, the why began while we were doing informal badging. As a makerspace, we offer classes, and in the beginning and even now, one of our major emphases was K-12 learning. And we immediately saw the effects of everyone not learning the same way. Kids were coming and saying, I can't do math and I can't do science, or asking, how does this work, even before they look at the parts and try to consider what they could make with them or what the part actually does. So during field trips, the conversations with the teachers would often turn to how difficult it was to create classrooms that had room for variation. It took time and energy and planning to give students who did not learn in the traditional ways an opportunity to do something like project-based learning. And when we listen to them, we understand that their schedules are really crowded, and we decided that we would offer to help in some kind of way. And if you'll do the next slide, our answer was to create kits that were constructed around the standards that were being taught to in the class. So these kits would take the planning out of the teacher's limited time to be able to allow extra challenges for non-traditional learners. So we would meet with the teacher, find out their needs, and create something that worked with their lessons. And the skills were broken down, and I guess the kid could master them without much interaction with the teacher and interaction with their fellow students. And so it made it more attractive. To make it more attractive, we had stickers, if you'll do the next slide, that'll show you one, that marked their completion, which were our first informal badges. Eventually, we began working with teachers through our innovative education program. So teachers need so many hours of professional development to be able to meet standards for advancement and therefore pay. And since we started this program, over 400 teachers have taken our PDs. So if you'll slide again. So we developed a special system that we call 654. We meet with the teachers for 6 hours around a topic. And so, for example, I'll say maker mindset. And we developed 6 hours of interaction with the instructors delivered in person at Gizmo. So they get access to tools, they get access to each other, they get access to whiteboards, and we're constantly talking with them. And the instructors go home and are required to interact with their classroom for 5 hours using the techniques that they had developed during the first 6 hours. And our mentors would Zoom with the instructors as a cohort so they could share what they were experiencing and give and get feedback from others. And then the instructors came back together for the 4 hours at the end of the 2-week period and debriefed, as well as worked on a project that they could take back to their classroom. And then COVID hit, and we were no longer able to meet in person. And if anybody wants to chat about that and how they pivoted, that would be fine too, because it really has affected how we were doing things. And all our PD had to come online. It was the perfect opportunity for us to create a badging system. First of all, let me say that we mourned for a very long time the loss of face-to-face, but we did finally get our big girl pants on, and we created a badging system that would include a pathway to get the PD credit. There are 5 modules. You can take them as a Zoom or a recorded webinar and earn the badge for each one by completing work for that you put into your e-portfolio. Or you could do all 5 and not only get the pathway badge, you could get PD credit from the University of Idaho. These badges are being tested now and will go live as badges in January. So if you could do the slide again. So we moved from our 2,800 square foot space into 11,000 feet on the campus of North Idaho College a few years ago. We see so many students who are not thriving. And I don't blame NIC. I think they've done a good job. But they aren't thriving. And once they discover Gizmo, they have a new way to interact and engage in education. Our major work started with engineering students. We were doing some teaching with the instructor, and he would bring the engineering students on tour, and the students would start using Gizmo as a place to hang out and study together, and quite often commiserate together. So many of them were talking about dropping out. So Idaho is, I think it's 48th in the nation in spending for K-12. And many of the seniors from our high schools are really unprepared for college. In our area, the community college is often where they end up. And they come already with a self-vision of not being smart enough. And the tutoring that they get continues to be book-based. And they don't have Velcro yet for the material. So a casual conversation with one of the counselors made me curious about starting a Gizmo club, a place where the students can come and earn badges while they were learning. So we have just started this club, which is meeting online so they can complete their first badge. When COVID lifts, we'll be ready for badging process for many of the tools at Gizmo and develop skills around laser cutters, water jets, welding, machine shop, design thinking, our printing lab, but also developing badges around resume building and some of the more needed skill sets around Microsoft Office and CAD programs. So they won't be a semester-long course, just enough to get to be able to use the machines in a safe way and be able to take an idea and bring it into reality. So if you'd slide. So badging in this case is not only a skill builder. I think you need to slide again, I'm not really sure. It keeps students engaged, and slide again. It's a way to allow students to try new things in a curated way, and it's a confidence builder and a resume builder. So I think at this point, if you think about badging, it lets the students find out if there is a pathway to something that excites them. And my mom always said to me, tiny bites are always best. And I have to wonder if that's true as students find their career paths. Can we give them a period of time in their higher education to allow them to see who they are and where they belong by using badging? And I'd love to know what your thoughts on that are about, could we commit to them having, I'm not saying a semester, but some time before they commit to a major? Is that possible within your system? So right now, if you do the slide again, you should see a slide about the Venture Center in North Idaho College. I hope that's where we are. I'm not really sure. So integrated into the makerspace is NIC's Venture Center. The Venture Center's mission is to support entrepreneurialism on the college campus and in the community. So for the last 2 years, we've been playing together. Their tools, our staff, their tools, our staff, our tools, their clients. And though we have not been intimately involved, they have been running academies and other entrepreneurial programs. And if you would make sure that the slide that's on now is female micro-entrepreneurial, I would appreciate that.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. You're doing a great job. Using some of the materials created by the Venture Centers program and some materials being generated through Etsy and Amazon, we have received funding to do a pilot micro-entrepreneurial badging program for women who are living under the Alice numbers and have not had the ability or a way to break through the glass ceiling of economic development. So this program will allow us to break up into separate badges. The steps necessary to be able to start, they will learn the steps necessary to be able to start an artisan-style business, learning about financial considerations, how to write a business plan, manufacturing techniques using our tools. And the badges will also be giving them information about marketing skills and how to use Etsy and Amazon as their selling platform, as well as they will be presenting to local businesses who will be selling the goods that they manufacture in their shops, allowing them to have another way of supporting this program. And our students who are doing the badging have a way to be able to have that interaction, learn how to talk to a client and present to a client. The badges will be bite-sized, doable pieces that they will be working on as a cohort. There will be different pathways that will lead in the end to this micro-entrepreneurial badge. So we have been working with local banks along with a women's gifting group that's in town to fund a micro-loan program using the Pathway badge and their e-portfolios as a major part of the loan application, so that the bank is willing to work and the Women's Gift Alliance is willing to work with these women to be able to get them into the next step of being an entrepreneur. So we hope to grow the badging program more, meeting the needs of the workforce and the tools of the makerspace. As the other programs take shape, we'll be meeting with the industries in the area with the idea of building internships in conjunction with badging. We had done that in one instance where we had Girls Who Code, and the high school seniors were going to be doing internships within business community. So we went to the businesses to find out what they needed to know that would make him be a valuable intern, and also give them a heads up, a step up, so when they went into their internship, they would be more successful. So in closing, I can't help but wonder, what is the future of education? Could it be a hybrid of learning that embraced a badging system, or there are more avenues for students to learn? And what if you could use badging to find out where your aptitudes really were, encouraging hands-on learning as well as learning in a conventional classroom? What if badging allows you to learn from a distance a specialty that is not offered locally? And what if you could use a resume to really show not only what you know, but to show how you got to that knowledge? So if you do the next slide. It's an exciting time to help education expand possibilities. I know each and every one of you who are sitting in on this webinar and all the webinars that are happening this week have that as your vision. I know that's what you want to have happen. So I hope that you will find time to look at badging as one of those things. And the next slide is a simple thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Barb. One of the questions that we have from our audience is interesting. They say, I have read that self-driven learning, such as lynda.com, viewing on online open courses, can lack a certain legitimacy because there isn't an outside authority to authenticate that. So particularly since I think a lot of the participants here are in education, we have accreditation bureaus that review us regularly, and so we have to establish the credentials of the professors, establish the content of the classes. Can you speak to that in the context of badging?
I can a little bit, and understand that I come from a different attitude because I am not a formal educator. The thing that I know is that, first of all, you as an institution and NIC as an institution of community colleges won't necessarily, even though all that credentialing has been done, teach in the same way. And so what they're getting anyway from those kinds of institutions can be two separate, very separate things. And it doesn't necessarily prepare them for college. And I think attitudes are changing, and that's why the open badge system, I think, is really good, because if you look at it, each of those things are documented. And so the person who is going to be hiring someone or allowing that person an opportunity to start a business or whatever that thing is going to look like will be able to see exactly what was learned. And I'm hoping that as we go forward, that having a badge, I'm going to say marketing is an easy one. I have a badge that would show that I know how to do Photoshop and my e-portfolio that shows what I've done in that Photoshop class. And I have a badge that shows I know how to do Illustrator and has a visual way for you to see what I've done in the class. And I have a badge that's taught me how to do marketing. And I have a badge that shows that too with an e-portfolio. That will start to have more validity, I think, than even sometimes just having a degree.
Do you know of any community colleges or consortium of higher ed? Do you know of any other institutions that are utilizing a badge system in some capacity? Have you connected to other people who are doing the same kinds of things in other areas?
Yeah, actually I have, because the University of Idaho, which was one of our first sponsors, is also down this path. Micro-credentialing is something that I think a lot of universities are starting to look at as a viable way to keep students coming to their institutions. And that's exactly why U of I has started doing it, because they feel it's a way that their academic enrollment is down, and they know that they having their name behind the badging system offers credibility. And so they're also doing the same thing.
One of the things I'll throw in a personal piece of information that I find interesting, I thought of during your presentation. I have a master scuba certification, and I realized that's a badge. There is no degree for that, but I went through a lot of classes, had to demonstrate functional skills, and really I think it's interesting that every time I go under the water, my life is on the line. If something goes wrong, this is a fun thing, but it's a very serious situation, and we allow that to happen despite the fact that it's not tied to a particular degree. Would it be helpful to know all of the medical science and to understand all the physics of water pressure and off-gassing in the bloodstream? That's all helpful, and that's part of the certification process. But I don't need a 4-year degree to do something that is potentially very deadly. and yet we do require a 4-year degree just so someone can apply for a job, as a mid-manager somewhere, which is not life-threatening. So I think it's interesting. In a traditional sense, we think, oh, we can't have people out there doing things without 4, 6, 8 years of college because we just can't trust them. We need that ability to trust them. And yet there are other kinds of things that we see, certifications for any kind of a recreational activity like that, that we do trust. And so it's kind of just a different shift in thinking.
Well, I want to take that a little bit further. So my husband and I ran a research and development company that really worked in the motion picture industry. So we developed new cameras, new optical designs. We did all of this work. And when we would go to hire someone, if that person had a badge that I could look at and see not only what the list of credentialing was to get that badge, but also see their e-portfolio and be able to see how they went through their process of iteration and be able to see how they think, that would have been so much better than hiring an engineer, a graduating engineer from University of Idaho who had never had the opportunity to take a complete project on their own from start to finish. I didn't know how they thought. I couldn't be able to see what was their skill set and what they had learned. And so having badging, which makes you do that kind of documentation, so you as the badge issuer have to write what is been taught or what the criteria is for the badge, and the person who's getting the badge has to perform with their e-portfolio showing you how they did it. Where do you get that from a degree? You as an employer, where do you get that from a degree?
Right.
And I'm not saying...
And actually, I think that does flow a little bit from just even the example that I gave. My certification for scuba diving. If I haven't, a lot of times, if you go for a dive and you schedule a dive, the dive shops will sometimes ask you, when was your last dive? So if I got my certification 10 years ago and I haven't been under the water in 5 years, you have your personal dive book. You have your log book of all the dives you've made, the depth, when they happened, what you did. And the dive shops will often ask to see that book or to have the information from it, basically as like an e-portfolio. Here's what I've done. Not only did I do the function, the academic, the educational skills 10 years ago and do them in a controlled environment, but here's what I've actually done since then with that information.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the other thing that we have seen around badging, and we are not fully, we just started a year ago informally and now formally. And the thing that we have seen is, and I'll take an example of one of the students who's an engineering student. So he would actually come in at night. He had a key to Gizmo. And when I would come in the morning, there would be all these formulas around about what they were studying. And one day, my husband said to this young man, have you ever thought what that really means? And he said, well, I understand it, in this theoretical kind of way. And my husband took him into the other room, and they started to do drawings. And he said to this young man, now look what would happen if this happened, and how this affects that. And being able to have the young man then sit down and Marty give him, some kind of a challenge, that allowed that conversation to keep going. That's why we started to do engineering as the badging thing, because he was saying, I can't do this, I'm going to drop out, because he didn't have a visual for how to apply it. The minute he had a badging project, he then had that visual, and it was a total changer.
Do you see any difference in I know this is still kind of a new program, but difference in the kinds of students that can succeed in a badging system? For example, I'm especially thinking about your references to K through 12. We have a lot of students who have learning or developmental delays or disabilities, and there are some skills or some academic areas that for cognitive or neurological reasons are simply not ever attainable for them. And so in a diploma degree world, that means these people are completely locked out of furthering their education. They're locked out of workforce often, even though they may have other functional skills that they would be very good at. Have you seen any work with students who maybe aren't in what we think of as a traditional, this is someone who's going to get their undergrad and then go to grad school and become an engineer or a doctor?
Yeah, we see it all the time, because actually we had the special education program in Coeur d'Alene got in touch with us and asked us if we would consider doing field trips with those kids. And we said yes. And the first thing that we did was we had a conversation with the teachers to find out what their interests were. And we started out with kids who would definitely be defined as not able to work at a, let's say, a high school level, even though they were in high school. And we decided to do drawing robots because we thought that would be of interest to them. And we went through and we taught it exactly like we would normally teach a class. And we always teach in the method of project-driven education, where it's their discovery and we are the people who are discovering with them. And by the end of the day, there were 3 kids who had not only done the robot thing, but they saw some computers on the other side and asked if they could take them apart. And this is what was really interesting. So one kid who absolutely you would have thought would not be able to do it, not only took it apart, but he put it back together. And when he got done, he said that he really was curious about it. So we hooked him up with a person in town, Alert Micro Systems, I think is what they were called. And that kid went on to be not an what his job was is taking apart computers and helping to diagnose what was wrong with it. That would not have happened if we hadn't done some kind of unusual situation with that kid. So we keep saying, no, they can't, and instead we should be saying or questioning, what is the can here? What can they do? And the more we do badging so we can break it down into small parts for them to be able to do, the more likely they are to be able to cap something to show an employer that they could do some specific job there.
That's a real interesting example. From what you remember of that person, do you think they would have been able to complete, say, a college computer science degree?
No way. No. No. But he definitely showed the skill set without, knowing he was doing it. He definitely showed the one skill set that was amazing, which is persistence. And not being afraid to say, I don't know.
I think one of the things that we have has become a really big deal in academia, especially at the K through 12 level here, is there's all this talk about SLO, student learning objective. That's a big thing. Teachers are having to define their SLOs very carefully. And if you really think about it, that is kind of a form of badging a piece of information. What is the objective at the end? What is the functional outcome that this will have? So perhaps there is some convergence, coming between academia and the idea of badging. But how do we make that transition happen? Because one of our attendees pointed out that it's worth noting that badging started in and is driven by industry rather than academia. And so whenever you have 2 very established systems like industry and academia, which does tend to be very heavily inertia driven, everybody kind of likes to stay on their side of the line. How do you make inroads and convince these 2 groups to work together? What are they missing out on if they don't start to converge or find a middle path between the 2?
So the one thing I will say is, and I'm not saying it's the only thing, but I think that the makerspace is the perfect way to help those 2 institutions be talking. Because we talk to industry and we hear from them what their needs are. And we talk to the university all the time, or the community college all the time, about where is this crossover. And the one thing that I think is going to be probably one of the biggest drivers is that it's going to become more and more difficult to get kids in the seats in the university. I really believe that. Enrollment is down here significantly, and I think it will keep going down because of the price of education. And so colleges are going to have to rethink what are the different options that they have. I think that's why the University of Idaho is so open to it. It's that they are understanding that there is an incredible need to bridge that divide. And badging allows you to do that. If you put the people in the room, and that's what you have to do, you have to have a conversation with the people in the room. It goes back to the adage of the smartest person in the room is the room. And it gives them an opportunity to be able to say, well, I don't like it for this reason, or it doesn't fill this need. And then there can be some flex and change that I think will change that. And maybe I'm just an optimist, but I really believe that it is not going to be two separate things. One really good example of that is the University of Idaho has, and I'm sure it's happening in other institutions, has a 3-2 program, I think they're calling it. So you do 3 years of college, and then you do the next 2 years of going out into industry, working, finding out what you don't know, and coming back and doing coursework. And you do that, I think, for 2 years. You go out for a little while, you find out what you don't know, you come back, and you take the necessary coursework. And that could be a badge. I mean, it could just turn into badging.
We have this is a question from Clifton in our attendees. We have all kinds of certificates these days, like community college certificates and various workforce type programs can take a year. Sometimes class certifications can take just a few months. Something like a CPR certification takes one day. What is the thing that makes a badge different from these kinds of certifications? Is it that it is small, or it has a project associated, or is it just that it has a graphic form? Is the badge itself visually, is it just that it has a graphic form to solidify that accomplishment?
I think what solidifies the accomplishment is the online ability to be able to check what was accomplished in that badge. So that's why the portfolio is so important, but also being specific when you begin a badge, that you are being critical and mindful of saying specifically what they had to accomplish in order to get that badge. Because otherwise, it is just like a certificate. You know, I have a certificate that says that I can drive a car. It's called a license. But you don't know without going back to, well, that one, I guess, is not a good example. A better one would be, you know, I have a certificate that says that I can use, we have a culinary program here, and you get a certificate saying that you can create these kinds of things and use these kind of tools, but it doesn't go into depth. It's pretty broad. But when you do badging, you are being very specific, and I think that's the difference. And it's the person who has the badge has the responsibility, but also has the incredible power of being able to say, this is what I did. Here's proof.
It's interesting. There's so much of what you've talked about today that does deal with things that we see all the time. Since I work for Tarrant County College, we see all the time the community college level, which is trying to get students past that hurdle to completion. And for us, completion means the degree. It means they get the degree, or they amass enough credits at the core level to transfer to a four-year institution, or they get one of the certificate programs. One of the things that we run into with completion, as you mentioned, a lot of students come in, they hate math, and that's the overwhelming majority, it seems, of our incoming students need some kind of remedial math in order to just get those core requirements. It makes me think of a program that was piloted at the Trinity River campus a few years back, where they realized we have students who get 2 months into a traditional semester and then fail out. They reach a point, something happens in their life, or the curriculum gets too difficult and they fail and they drop the class, and now they have to wait another 3 months to start again and retake the same class from the beginning. And if that class isn't offered that next semester, now they have to wait another year for the next fall semester to start that class. So they tried to break up the class into chunks whereby if a student needed to drop for some reason, they could rejoin kind of already in progress with the credit they already had to see if that would improve completion rates. What size of chunk with badging? Talk about that. Talk about the size of the chunks that would go to a badge. At some point, we give badges for something like, the Boy Scout example. Well, this person knows how to start a fire. That's a badge. This person knows how to safely use a knife. That's a badge. How small does it get before it seems kind of irrelevant in a workforce situation?
Okay, so I want to go back to one thing you said, and then I'll talk about that. When we got approached from the counseling center to start a Gizmo club, one of the things, and this is just, I need to remember to say it, so I'm just going to say it. One of the things that was just like so prevalent in that conversation, it came up so many times, was that badging is a resume builder. And that when you look, what they're now doing is they're taking a look at students and helping them to build their resumes in the counseling center and be able to address what is missing in their resume so they can create either a course or now a badge to be able to fill in that missing hole for the resume, to either make them able to go on to college or to get the job the child or the student thinks is the job that they want to have. And so when I think about badging, the badges can be pretty small because sometimes it's just to do one skill that several students or many students seem to be missing or not picking up in their coursework. And that's been a very interesting thing in my dealing with their conversations around it, because I hadn't thought of it as a resume builder until they started to talk about it. So a badge can be very small. But I think that when you're seeing students having a lot of students having problems with something like math, there needs to be a design thinking meeting that goes on, trying to identify where the problem starts and how can you fix it as quickly as possible so they don't keep going on, hitting their head against the wall and reinforcing the idea of them not being able to do math. And I think that's what happens, because they come from high school thinking they can't do math. They get into a classroom situation, and once again, they can't do math, and then they go to the tutorial place, the tutoring center, and rather than teaching them in a different way, which was what you could do with badging, they go on and teach them the same way that they have not been able to do math throughout their last 10 years. So to me, a badge can be pretty small when the consequences are trying to educate somebody who has had the definition for a long time that they are not good in math. They are not good in whatever, English or science. So when I look at it, I think some of the beginning badges are small. We did that with our CAD badges when we broke them down. Because CAD can be overwhelming, and either you're a 3D person or a very visual person or you're not. So it can be really overwhelming. So if you break it down into a small enough bite, then they're going to do CAD. But if you give them a whole semester of CAD where they don't get it right away, they're not going to graduate. They're not going to pass that class knowing how to do CAD. So I think small is good, but I also think doing a design thinking with the team to find out what needs to be taught and how it could be taught differently in smaller chunks is really an important step that we're not talking about here.
How, in terms of teaching that, how does a teacher or professor get started? What should they do if they want to bring this into their classroom or into their educational institution or into their field? How to get started with that?
I think the best way to get started with it is to look and see what other institutions are doing, what's already been done, because it helps you kind of center on. I always like to see something that I can push against, which just tells you what my personality is like. I really, sometimes seeing how somebody else is doing something gives me the attitude of, no, I wouldn't do it that way, and makes me think of why I wouldn't do it that way. So I hate to say that sometimes looking around to see what other people are doing is important. But one of the things we're going to do this summer, we're in the middle of the conversation around it, is we're going to do an institute, a teaching institute that will help an instructor be able to see. Here's what I will say. In the institution that I am embedded in, North Idaho College, I think it's very difficult for an instructor who, in my opinion, doesn't get paid enough to be able to find the time to be able to restructure their curriculum. There just isn't that thought time to be able to do that. So what we've done is we've changed our attitude about that, and we try to get the instructor to pick one thing that they can change. And it can only needs to be, a week of instruction, 2 days of instruction, but change one thing into this other method of thinking. If we think that teachers are going to take a look at it, instructors are going to take a look at it and change what they do on the bell-shaped curve of instructors, there are going to be a couple that'll do that or some that will do that, and the rest of them are not going to want to put the time into it. But if you can get that median part of the bell-shaped curve to look at changing one thing, you have a much better opportunity to get change to happen.
It does sound like then that is a great opportunity for collaboration between professors and people in maker spaces or labs or industries, local industries, where they can kind of reach out to each other and say, hey, what are the functional skills that my students would learn in your area? And how can we represent that in a way that the student will feel like value was added, not to just to what they know, but actually in a resume sense, how they can badge that and take that forward with them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, remember I said when I was talking that my mom always said that tiny bites were always best. And she wasn't only talking about food, I don't think. I think that what she was saying is, I'm like the shark. I just want to come in and bite off the whole thing. And I've had to learn that that is not always the best way to make change happen. That if you can identify a small area where you can make change, you are more likely to build the confidence of that person who you're trying to get to change their way of delivering information. But you also give them the confidence that I can do this. There is a way for me to be able to do this.
I think that's a really good point. I certainly will take that away from this because I run the 3D printing lab on my campus, and remembering that for a professor to rebuild the entire structure of their curriculum and all the objectives they have to have in a semester just so they can introduce badging or some kind of functional lab skill, they have too much on their plate to be able to restructure the entire curriculum around that and still meet whatever their departmental and accreditation demands are. So for those, this is a great opportunity for people like me to be able to, when the professor says, I want to bring my class in to do a thing, for me to then look at that thing and say, well, what are the SLOs? What are the outcomes here, and how can we represent that in a way?
Yeah, and the other thing I would add to that is it's really important that you, as the person who wants to change an institution, takes the time to read through that you don't go blindly saying, I have the answer, that you have done the homework of knowing what the standards are and what has to be met so that you know intelligently how you can suggest change.
Do you know of any badging platforms or systems that are integrated with online portfolio workplace tools like LinkedIn?
Oh, well, they all can be. I'm not sure what you mean by that. You can you can use any of the other platforms to be able to show what you've done. Is that what you mean? I'm not sure what the question is.
There was a question from the audience. They just asked if those are, let's see, where was that question? If they show up in a resume, hold on, I'm scrolling to where that question was. Oh yeah, it's whether or not that they integrate with platforms like LinkedIn. I presume the question is basically meaning something like when someone, perhaps a recruiter, goes to your profile on a site like LinkedIn and you list a badge, a way for that to be linked to where the person evaluating you can look at that badge and actually then go to the institution or organization or corporation that issued that badge and kind of check that the same way they would check your academic credentials if they wanted to.
Yes, it's all integrated within the badge structure.
Wonderful.
You, as a receiver of the badge, have a link to that badge, and in the badge, it lists all the criteria and also a link to your e-portfolio. So it doesn't matter whether it's from LinkedIn or whatever, as long as they've seen your resume or your listing, where they've seen it, there is on your resume a place where it says what the link is, and it just automatically sends them there.
Talk about, since this does go more towards workforce development, career, being able to take it into the future, resume building, is there any data yet on differences in pay scale? I think the reason that the last 20 years of young people have all gone to college is because they've had quoted at them 1,000 times that there's a 30% pay difference between a high school diploma and an undergraduate degree, and then another 30% between the 4-year degree and the master's or the doctorate. Is there any similar data into how badging affects pay scales going forward?
Honestly, I haven't looked at that yet. I haven't looked at that, and probably I should, so I appreciate the question, and I will mark it down. But I can tell you, as an employer for 40 years, that if someone came to me with a badge and I could see what their skill set was and I could see how their work was, and someone came to me and I was comparing two people with badges, I would be able to tell which is the one that's going to be more productive in my company. And I would definitely up their pay because I want that person and I want that person to stay. So I think that it is a way of doing that, but I don't have the data that backs that up. It's just a way I think.
Since you do come from the world outside academia, and I, as someone who's worked in academia for most of my life, there does tend to be a kind of insulated silo effect that occurs there. Do you have any sense among other entrepreneurs or business leaders if those attitudes are changing as far as the willingness to evaluate the person and their skills? Because I think the difference that I hear from a lot of young people who don't have college degrees is it's not like it was 25 years ago when you could actually walk into the business and talk to a person. Now all the application is online, and if you can't check the box for the minimum requirements for the position, the HR platform just kicks you right out. So you don't even get a chance to be evaluated. What is your sense of how that attitude is working in the business world right now?
I think that there are lots of businesses that use AI to read resumes, and if you don't check all the boxes, or even if you've done all the boxes and you don't write it right in your resume, you get kicked out. We are one of the cybersecurity sites. I can't remember what the credential is, but one of the guys who is hires for NSA, no, not NSA, and the National Security, whatever. I'm sorry, I don't remember acronyms very well. It's one of the problems of getting older. But anyway, he was telling us about one of the governmental organizations that gets about 3,000 applications a day. And all they do is they have an AI thing that reads through, and if it meets certain criteria, certain words show up in your resume, then you go on, and if not, you're kicked out. So that is happening, and there's no way that I know of yet that would cause you to not, that would help you get hired in a situation like that if you don't have the normal expected criteria that they ask for. But that being said, I would say, I live in a town that thinks it's pretty innovative and that they have lots of young 30-somethings coming in that have new businesses started, 30s and 40s. They're starting new businesses, and they are not necessarily looking at what the resume says. So it depends on what kind of organization you want to work for. When I was 30, I tried to get a job at HP, and they wouldn't even look at my application because I didn't have a college degree. And when we were just starting our business, my husband and I tried to, we said maybe we shouldn't start right away. We tried to get a job at a lens company, and the lens company wouldn't even look at us again because we didn't have the right criteria. We met those same people at a gathering. Why can't I remember the name of it? A trade show. And they came out to us and they said, "Big mistake." But they wouldn't even look at us. So I can't say that right now at this day and age, everybody would be able to get past that kind of review system. But I say give it 10 years from now and it's going to be changing all the time.
Interesting.
I don't know how do you feel about it? It's like, what do you think?
Personally, I'm definitely a fan of the idea of functional skills and badging. I just think in the modern era, there are so many. I mentioned this in a session yesterday. I was a math major, and even as a math major who absolutely loves math, the reality is 99.999% of college graduates are never going to need to know the quadratic formula ever again in their lives. And the other 0.0001% are math professors. So I think requiring them to complete all of those things so that they can be a historian or an anthropologist or something, it just seems kind of a little outmoded. One of the things I found really interesting in your conversation was you talked about how Gizmo the Gizmo space was set up, and students would just you opened it up and let them come hang out. And while they were there, then they kind of organically self-directed their interest in what was going on around them. Talk about that. Talk about the culture of the space and how you made the space welcoming and encouraging of students to ask questions and to get involved.
I can't help myself. I mean, nobody who works here can help themselves. First of all, they're really curious, and then they're not only curious about what they're doing, they're curious about what somebody else is doing. And when you can come into a space, and in one corner of the space, there is what we call the magic room, where the magic smoke lives for electronics. There are right-in boxes. You can take out an Arduino and start playing with it, or a microbit and start playing with it. But all around you are stuff that's running off of Arduinos and microbits. It's a natural. But the thing that makes it even more is the fact that, let's put it this way, my husband and I came from different backgrounds. I was more of a design background and he was more of an engineering background. And when you put those two together, the difference is that an engineer believes in physics and a designer doesn't. That's really the difference. So we're willing to take more risk because I can push him off his center, and he can also bring me back to where I need to be able to solve a problem that I have reoccurring. So when you come into a space where there is this energy all the time, where somebody is always doing something or learning something, you get wrapped up in it. You can't help yourself. So a person comes in, they really think they like to do clay, and they start doing these clay, this is an example that just happened recently, they start doing these clay dishes, and they are carvers. They like to carve designs on them. So somebody else who's using the CNC router comes in and says, you've just done 3 of those. How long did it take you? And the person says, oh, about 7 hours or something like that. I can't remember how long it was. And the guy says, you know, the CNC router will do that for you. You can put the slip on it, and the CNC router will cut out the design. Just take that design, you'll learn a little bit of CAD, and you can run the CNC router. So now the person who took 7 or 10 hours to do 3 is doing them in 15 minutes. So it's that kind of energy. It's like you can't help but look over your shoulder and say, what the heck is that guy doing? I want to do it too.
Wonderful. Well, we have filled up our time, and I feel like this conversation is one that could definitely keep on going, but we're at the end of our time. I want to thank you for joining us. Barb Mueller has been wonderful. We do want to definitely mention that our afternoon session that starts at 2 p.m. Central Time flows perfectly from this discussion, and it's about developing e-portfolios. And Hank Johnson, who's a special projects coordinator here at TCC, will be running that session. So that also will be an actual meeting. So you'll be able to mic and camera and share and talk and collaborate back and forth. We do want to encourage everyone to go back and check the schedule and participate in the rest of the week's events. And we hope everyone had a great time. Thank you all for your wonderful questions and comments. It really made the discussion fascinating. Thank you, Barb.
Thank you for the opportunity, and you were wonderful.
I also do want to give one more shout out to Jeanette Laredo, who was actually the one running the slide deck. Since we had the technical difficulties, we had one of our producers run the slide deck so that Barb and I could just do the chatting.
I just want to say that the people at the Makerspace will be delighted that I had a technical difficulty.
Wonderful. Everyone have a great day. We hope to see y'all back at 2.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.